Let's talk about the cutscenes sandwiching the first fight of Yakuza 6. These cutscenes are important because this is the kind of cutscene you're going to be making a lot. Cutscenes leading into gameplay and cutscenes leading out of gameplay. These are techniques you can't learn by watching films because films have no gameplay. So you've got to look at games to learn these things, and this is a really great example. When you're leading into gameplay, you got to get the player amped, which means you have to know what mental state the player is in at the beginning, and then you got to change that mental state into one where they want to do the gameplay. And then once the gameplay is over, you got to use that emotional tension, that release of winning at the game, and spin that into a more permanent attachment, a more permanent emotional bond with the closing cutscene. That's what they're going to do with these cutscenes. It's very workmanlike. It's very approachable. You should be able to use the same techniques. The trick is knowing what you're trying to accomplish. These cutscenes, they're not trying to explain a plot point. They're not trying to be super duper artsy. They're trying to get the player from emotional state A to emotional state B. So we're going to talk about several of the techniques used. First, I want to run through it on its own with a focus on how the camera moves. Pay attention to when the camera is still and when it's in motion, and you can see how they're starting to move us from a remote, quiet disinterest into actually wanting to fight and bumping the mic. That's fine. Let's go ahead and watch it through once on its own with attention paid to the camera motion.
おい、なんじゃい。あまり時間がねえ。早いとこ済ませてんだがな。なんならそんなに死に急ぎたいっちゅうわけかの。いいからさっさとかかってこい。お前の脳が聞いてるとこっちの予定が狂っちまう。そんじゃったら安心せえ。今日から先踊れの予定は全部白紙じゃ。
Fun stuff. So hopefully you noticed how the camera started to move with the player's gathering interest. At the end, of course, you've got all that snap zoom stuff, which really cements it. But even in the middle, we were having a lot of really fun camera performance. The trick here is that the player is Kazuma. The player and Kiryu are the same mental state. And the camera represents Kiryu's point of view. Even when it's pointed at Kiryu, it's really from Kiryu's perspective, which is why Kiryu is always center frame and solid, because that's how he sees himself. So let's go through it shot by shot, and then after that we'll go through it and we'll talk about some of the cute narrative tricks used to get the player interested in the fight. These opening shots are really fantastic. They're obviously establishing shots, but they're establishing shots that establish that the fight doesn't matter. We're coming in off of a cutscene where we were drinking quietly at a bar and then some guy harassed us and we didn't give a shit. We still don't care about this guy. It's established that we don't care about this guy, and we don't care about this fight, and we don't care about any of that. So the cutscenes are quiet and remote. The shots are quiet and remote. They're using this opportunity to establish Onomichi, an important city, and the texture of that city. And they're also establishing that nobody cares about this fight except for the one dude. Like, we don't care, the city doesn't care, the cats don't care. We're very far from the fight. And then we have this remote crane shot where we slowly zoom in. The fight is still tiny. It's in a tiny little part of a tiny little town. It doesn't matter. And now we're getting a little bit closer. Now, Nagumo is ranting on his own, and Kazuma doesn't care. Because he doesn't care, he is unmoved, and the camera is unmoved. So here Kiryu is starting to get annoyed. He looks at his wristwatch. He's starting to realize that this is more annoying than expected, and he's going to start to get closer to the fight now. He's starting to get a little bit invested in the idea of giving this guy a beatdown. So the camera also gets more invested. The camera starts to track, starts to get closer, starts to pay attention to Nagumo. Now, once again, these shots of Kiryu are basically from Kiryu's perspective. That's why he's center frame, he's rock solid, he's not moved, and we have these wonderful shots at a slightly low angle to remind us how important he is. This two-shot doesn't feature any camera tracking of Nagumo, because if the camera tracked Nagumo, that would force Kiryu to move on the screen. And the whole conceit here is that he doesn't. Kiryu is an immovable object in these scenes. And that's why this is a lockdown shot, just in case you're wondering why the camera stopped tracking him. Here we're getting another close-up of Kiryu, but you notice that we're right in his face now. The other one from before had a little bit of reserve. We were a couple, a meter or so back, and now we're right up in his face. The standard textbook way to do close-ups like this: the closer the close-up, the tighter the close-up, the more emotional the actor will read, even if he's Kazuma Kiryu with his unemotional deadpan. Just getting up in his face will amplify the emotions that we think he's having. Basic technique, and it's a great way to get us on board. Here's where the zooming starts. This is a classic bit of snap zooming. And of course they add in some musical stings as well. This technique is basically the one that is used for virtually every fight you get into in this game. Not all of them have these big cutscenes at the beginning. A lot of them just kind of start, but when they start, the camera does this little snap zoom pulse and music plays, just like it's about to do here. So this is a technique that you can use even without the preceding cutscene. Pretty good. Now obviously from there it cuts straight into gameplay and we're in a fist fight right away. That's a sort of camera trick you don't see in films, because what would happen after that? The guy dashes at the camera and then what? Well, in a video game, that's when you take over and you get to actually play, and that's why it's a two-shot, because you're about to be in control of one of those characters. There is a difference between how you handle these things in video games and in film, and that's one of the big ones. If you're leading into gameplay, it's very different than in a film when you're leading into the next scene. Now, with all of that explored, it's important for us to understand that this isn't just camera motions, and that's pretty clear, right? There's a lot of narrative going on here, and this narrative is really tightly bound to the flow of our emotions and Kiryu's emotions, our involvement in the fight. We start at this we're at peace. We're not very bothered. We're not worried about the fight. We're not worried about this guy. We don't care. And narratively speaking, it's important to bring the player into caring. Not in some kind of life or death struggle kind of way, but in enough of a way that we do want to fight this guy. Now, in order to do that, Kiryu has to care as well. So how do you bring Kiryu and the player into wanting to do this fight? You give them something they can both react to. Somewhat annoying. A classic approach to this kind of thing is if someone annoying happens by and wants to fight, both you and the main character will react in a predictable way at the same time. You'll both get annoyed. So let's just go ahead and take a look at how that unfolds, although it's probably pretty clear by now. Now, in the previous cutscene, he was already pretty annoying, but now he gets to go on this rant. Now, as mentioned, the camera's locked down here. We're not moved by his performance here at all, but the fact that we're seeing his performance, that we're forced to watch it and pay attention to it at all, is inherently annoying. And then this happens. This guy, he's not even poking us for any good reason. He's doing it because he's a blowhard. He's doing it because he's got a crush on this lady in the bar and he thinks that we're competition. And so it's all a performance. It's just him being annoying because he's an annoying person. There's no stakes, and he's wasting our freaking time. But just as the player is starting to think, oh my god, is this for real? Are we really going to listen to this blowhard talk about his crush? What happens? That's right. Kiryu does the same thing. Kiryu's like, come on guy, this is really dumb. And Kiryu starts to get annoyed at the same time as the player. More or less. This is a really good technique. Now, if this is your first time playing the game, you may not realize that Nagumo is going to be a major character, and you might be wondering why they're giving him so much screen time. And it's true, if Nagumo was just a walk-on role, it would be difficult to excuse giving him this many lines, because he goes on and on and on. But he is an important character for the story, and that's an important consideration. He's annoying, and that is going to be a recurring theme with him. But because he is a major character, we can give him as much time as he needs to be annoying. If he was a walk-on role, it would be much harder to get the player to sync up with the fight, because it would be inconsequential. The fight would be inconsequential. The character would be inconsequential. Using a fairly major character in this manner, in a flash forward, is a really good idea. It gives you the elbow room you need to actually get the player's emotions to sync up with the main characters. Now that Kazuma is going to start to engage, note that we're starting to actually get conversation between the two, and that means two shots. We very rarely get two shots of them talking to each other. But now that the conversation has started, we got a two-shot, starting after this. Now the two-shot is here, and it's saying, yeah, now Kiryu's paying attention to you. You might not have actually wanted that. He's still going on, he's still being annoying, we're amping it up, and then here Kiryu cuts it down. He's like, okay, you've been annoying long enough, let's get to the punching. And the player should feel the exact same way. We're in sync, and we've both been dragged up from our quiet little evening in a bar into the tutorial fight. Getting that emotional context synced up and merged together is the critical part of how these cutscenes need to work. It's the driving core of these cutscenes. It's the reason they exist. And then this part's just the final ramp up. Let's get things going. Good stuff. So now that we've gone through the opening cutscene, that's an example of how you can ramp up the player, get them interested in the upcoming fight, and then just splash into the fight directly. Like, oh, the fight starts, and the player's never confused, they're never caught unaware, they always know what the situation is, and they're always excited to go through with it. The other half of that is the dismount. Once the player is done with the fight, they've got all this energy that they've put into doing the gameplay, and they've come out victorious, and it's time to wind that energy back into the narrative, invest it in emotional beats, so that we can actually connect to the story. If you waste that energy and you just let it dissipate with no comment, it's a huge loss. You want to marshal it. You want to get it so that it actually pays off and does some good in the long run for your story. That's when you use a closing cutscene like this one. We're going to go ahead and play it through on its own once. Pay attention to how the energy of victory, we were just coming in off of a fight where we were pressing buttons and shouting at the screen. Pay attention to how the energy of victory is redirected, once again through Nagumo being annoying, into forming an emotional bond with Kazuma.
Yosh, わかった。そしたら第一ラウンド終了じゃ。わしも体が温まってきたけ。こっからが本番じゃ。お遊びにはもう十分付き合ってやった。今のは肩慣らしじゃ言うとろうが。いい加減にしやがる。俺にはもう時間がねえんだ。なんなら遊び相手なら他のやつを当たれ。お前と違って俺は忙しい。
Short and sweet. At this point, we're pretty tightly synced up with Kazuma. Not only have we been synced up by the previous cutscene, but we've also been playing as him. Our fists have been swinging whenever we hit the A button, and so clearly there is a lot of connection between us and him, and they further that in this cutscene. The beginning of the cutscene is also still us synced up with Kiryu. We're in perfect harmony with him as Nagumo starts to blow hard again. We're like, oh my god, we need to shut this guy up. He's so annoying. And what does Kiryu do? Steps in to shut him up because he's so annoying. From there, now that we're perfectly synced up, we've got the emotional context, we've got the emotional energy, Kiryu redirects that back into this mysterious something that he has to do, which has been around since the first cutscene. There's something he's waiting for, something he's been delaying, and we are now on board with it. I don't think I even have to analyze this scene in detail, but we'll play through it once again. Maybe I'll pause it once, or it's very straightforward. We just have him be annoying. He's just this performative blowhard. And then just as the player is getting annoyed with it, so is Kazuma. So Kazuma cuts him off. Perfect sync with the player, in theory. Sorry, I hit pause instead of... sorry, I clicked some wrong buttons there. So I wanted to say that him going, huh? What? Is really good. It shows that his performative blowhardness isn't impenetrable. He's clearly willing to be human under other circumstances, and we broke through his wall of self-absorption for a moment there, and that lets us pull him back from the edge a little bit. Nagumo isn't an unsalvageable annoyance. He is, but he's not supposed to be. We're supposed to be pulled back from that by him realizing that he might have gone too far, and realizing that this fight is not serious, and even he knows it's not serious. And that really does a lot to soften the amount of annoyingness that this guy has. And then we just have the denouement where we pull that energy back into Kiryu's whatever Kiryu is doing, whatever Kiryu is up to. How mysterious. So, that was the cutscene set around the tutorial of the game, and it can feel pretty straightforward, right? But it's a skill. You've got to actually know what you want to say and how you want to say it, and that means you've got to understand how you're going to be building the player's interest in the fight, and how you're going to be using the energy of the fight to channel it back into your narrative. There's a million options. There's a million ways to do it, but it's something that you have to do on purpose. There are other games where your tutorial fight is interesting in other ways. You get interested in it in a different way. And you're not always in a one-to-one sync with the main character. There are games where the main character is a little bit remote from you, and they still have to pull this kind of setup off where you're still excited for the fight. You're still interested in piloting around your main character, even though you're not perfectly synced up. There's a lot of fun considerations, a lot of fun different approaches. We're going to see a couple of other intros and exits from fights over the course of Yakuza 6. So we'll get to kind of compare and contrast different approaches as they come up. But this was a fun way to start. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.